The term nihilism is thrown around a lot to describe the predicament of the West. It was Nietzsche who first brought this term into popularity, but more recently it has been taken up by the conservative right, popularized by Jordan Peterson. But what does nihilism really mean? Jordan Peterson uses it to describe a lack of meaning, the so-called meaning crisis, which he blames on the West's departure from Christianity. Peterson hits upon one aspect of Nietzsche's diagnosis of the modern West, but he misses, or at least does not address, the more general idea of nihilism as presented by Nietzsche. Nihilism for Nietzsche is firstly a physiological problem. It occurs when the will of a people has been discharged and exhausted. All else is a consequence of this. Nihilism is a symptom, not a cause. Let me read to you from Twilight of the Idols, Whether We Have Grown More Moral. Quote, I permit myself to raise the question whether we have really grown more moral. That all the world believes so is already an objection to it. We modern men, very delicate, very vulnerable, and paying and receiving consideration in 100 ways, imagine in the fact that this sensitive humanity, which we represent, this achieved unanimity in forbearance, in readiness to help, in mutual trust, is a positive advance, that with this we have gone far beyond the men of the Renaissance. But every age thinks in this way, has to think in this way. What is certain is that we would not dare to place ourselves in Renaissance circumstances, or even imagine ourselves in them. Our nerves could not endure that reality, not to speak of our muscles. This incapacity, however, demonstrates not an advance, but only a difference, a more belated constitution, a weaker, more delicate, more vulnerable one, out of which is necessarily engendered a morality which is full of consideration, the decay of our hostile and mistrust-arousing instincts, and that is what constitutes our advance, represents only one of the effects attending our general decay of vitality. Our softening of customs, this is my thesis, my innovation, if you like, is a consequence of decline. Stern and frightful customs can, conversely, be a consequence of a superabundance of life, for in the latter case much may be risked, much demanded, and much squandered. What was formerly a spice of life would be a poison to us. Our virtues are conditioned, are demanded by our weakness. Equality, a certain actual rendering similar of which the theory of equal rights is only the expression, belongs essentially to decline. End quote. In this passage, Nietzsche lays out his general opposition to modernity, but I specifically want to draw attention to his remarks on values and ages. Nietzsche asserts that our values follow from our instincts, from what we are. It is our weakness which came first and demanded the values of equality, comfort, etc., he says. This is probably the first or most important principle of Nietzschean thinking when discussing values and morality. He asserts that our values are not objective. They are merely interpretations of the world. This is not to say that there is no reality, and that certain values cannot be better aligned with reality. But what do we mean by reality? Each organism is itself an interpretation of the world. Through evolution, each organism has adapted to the world differently and been shaped by the world differently, so that all organisms move through and interact with the world in unique ways and perceive the world in different ways. The reality of the fish is not the reality of the bird, of you or I. Each lives by an interpretation of reality. And now stretch your imagination to microorganisms. Our values follow from our physiology, from the very structure of our being. We say that certain things are objectively wrong, for example, murder, but we make exceptions for war, and for the killing of the wicked. Our values are always put forth from a perspective, from our perspective. They are always within context, and that context is our organic being. And we can apply this logic to peoples. A people who scorns comfort and loves danger and war is that way because of their warlike instinct. Such a people would not value comfort or equality. They would rebel against a society which does so. A really simple example of this is the body positivity movement. People who claim that being obese should not be taboo, and even go so far as to say that being obese is not unhealthy, or that obese bodies are just as beautiful as healthy bodies, are usually obese themselves. There was recently a Jubilee episode in which two sides argued for and against body positivity. Unsurprisingly, all of the people on the for side were all overweight, while all of the people on the against side were relatively fit. So what came first? The way they are, or their ideology? I'm sure it's exceedingly rare that a healthy person discovers the fat acceptance movement and then decides to overeat and become 300 pounds. Almost always, you'll discover that they were obese first and then found the ideology. In other words, they were a certain way first and found an ideology that fits and supports that way of being. This is not to say that ideology does not affect people. If you believe it's healthy to be fat, you may be less likely to diet and exercise. If our society values beauty and health, you'll be more likely to exercise and be fit. But as a general rule, most morals are used as a way to justify the way one already is, or to adapt, to interpret the world to one's advantage. If you believe that there are no health risks with being 400 pounds, then you absolve yourself of the moral guilt which comes with knowing that you are harming yourself. If you believe and moreover convince others that being fat is not objectively less attractive than being fit, then you can remove the social disadvantage which comes with it. Even better, if you can make being fat a virtue and claim that dieting and working out is the real sin because it represents a deep psychological illness or the oppressive patriarchal value system, etc., then you can make yourself good and morally justified, and you can find content making all of these claims online. So, to summarize, every organism is an interpretation of the world. Morality is a way of interpreting the world, and with morality we can shape our social environment and adapt the world to better suit us. In short, values stem from instincts. The conservative right, figures like Jordan Peterson and the other Daily Wire associates, call for a return to traditional Christianity in order to combat nihilism. But as I discussed in my last video, in doing so, they fundamentally misunderstand what religion is. They misunderstand cause and effect. They argue that the Middle Ages was Europe's golden age, and since medieval Europe was Christian, it must have been Christianity which made them great. Therefore, if we return to medieval Catholicism, we will also be great. But I'm sure by now you'll see that this is flawed logic. Was it really Christianity that made them great? Or was it the Germanic tribes which made Christianity great? Medieval institutions like the church and the medieval kingdoms and states arose to support the instinct for conquest and war and the need for organization. If the Germanic tribes had stayed pagan, would medieval society have never developed? If so, how do you explain the flourishing culture of pagan Greece or medieval Islam? Why don't all Christian societies look like medieval Europe? Medieval society grew from the spirit and culture of the Germanic tribes. If we want a similar renaissance, it is not their beliefs or institutions which we need, but their vitality and spirit.
This video is an excerpt from the ARC's exclusive podcast. For the full 30-minute episode and access to a private Telegram community dedicated to the creation and implementation of vitalism, check the links in the description. You can also download the art from this channel on Ko-fi for free or donate. Thank you for your support. It makes this channel possible.